Hey everyone, my name is Kretz and today I want to tell you about the weirdest Canon lens that I have ever used. Yeah, it's really so strange that, it's just weird, And we'll see about its quality, we'll see how it performs in full frame on crop sensor cameras, we'll test it in different environments. But first, and I will of course go outside and shoot in the streets, but since we're here at my apartment on a high floor, we'll take a few pictures out of the window as well. But first of all, I want to tell you that this lens was manufactured and released in 1995, so it's almost 30 years. Today is 2024, and I want to just compare it with the other lens that was manufactured the same year. And at first glance, 30 years, it looks like this lens must be really cheaply built, very bad, and maybe it has poor quality, and it really does. Yeah, it's very cheap lens, you see. It's a plastic toy, yes, I'll tell you all about it. But actually it's not the worst that I have ever seen. It's not the worst, it's weirdest, but it's definitely not the worst. And now let's zoom out a little bit and see there's a lot of stuff here, and I'll tell you all about that now. But let's now compare it to this one. And this lens I've been dreaming about for a couple of years, and finally I could afford it on my birthday. That's a gift to myself, so to say. And this is 200mm prime lens with 2.8 wide bright maximum aperture. So this is just gorgeous lens, you see. It's absolutely contemporary, electronics, focusing, autofocus, manual focus, everything. A totally fine lens, manufactured the same year that this plastic toy, 1995. Absolutely gorgeous lens, both in build quality and in picture quality. And imagine, the same year, Canon produces this little plastic strange thing, 38 to 76mm f4.5 to 5.6. So it's like a standard zoom lens or something like that. It's dirt cheap, it's feather light, I'll tell you all about it later. But it works, the electronics work, the aperture electronic control works, the autofocus is fully capable of anything, and it has a couple of advantages as well. But before we are going out and shoot something in the street, let's do the pictures out of the window, and for that I would use my 5D Mark III camera. I still don't have any mirrorless cameras. I'm shooting video with 6D Mark II camera, full frame, and 5D Mark III full frame as well, because this is actually a full frame lens. We'll talk about crop sensors in a few seconds, but first let's take a couple of shots out of the window. On a wide angle with the open aperture and with the shut down aperture, as we usually do with the landscapes. And 5D Mark III is old camera comparing to this day, but it's a very modern camera comparing to this lens produced 30 years ago, and 22 megapixels is quite challenging enough for such an old lens, which was actually invented for film cameras. At those days, in the middle of 1990s, it was still a film era, and this is a totally digital camera. So let's see how this lens can cope with 22 megapixels. For that, we'll of course open the window and use the tripod. Use the tripod, level the camera out, use the aperture priority mode, go in live view for very reliable contrast autofocus. I didn't autofocus, I'm sorry. We'll autofocus, use timer. This is a picture at 4.5, and let's shut it down to say f9. Yeah, that's enough for the test. But I also want to test it on the video, and we'll do that on 5D Mark III as well. It doesn't have autofocus. It has manual focus only for video, but I'll shoot it with wide aperture, right? And see, at 38mm wide angle here. Let me see, what about focusing here? But let's just start the video. But you know what? This lens has quite dark maximum aperture of 4.5 at wide angle, but at ISO 100 and 4.5, it is still quite dark for daylight. But I actually happen to have this small ND filter for 52 millimeters diameter filter thread on this lens. So let me screw this on and see if this is going to be good enough. Well, now for 25 frames per second and 1/50th of a second shutter speed and 4.5 aperture, this is ISO 150, 200, something like that. And let's shoot the video and let's focus. With manual focusing, what can we see? Well, we can actually see the focus breathing in and zooming in and out while focusing, right? And that's considerable. But what we also see is the vignetting. So the lens vignettes when you zoom, I believe, in and out. It zooms a little bit in, so vignettes getting lower and lower. But we also see a distortion here. Look at the right side here. You see the the wall of a building is actually like bowing a little bit. So there is a distortion. But we'll talk about the aberrations later. But as of right now, we see that's the vignetting. But let's check out if that's not the vignetting from the filter. So I'll make the shutter speed way shorter, like 1/2000th of a second. That's better for video, but maybe the vignetting was due to filter. No, it was not, because you see it. Shorter distance, yeah, there's the vignetting, and when you refocus, the vignetting is getting less and less. Yeah, so there's a problem. Focus breathing, which is not a problem for photo, but maybe a problem for video, and vignetting, of course. But let's now zoom into 76 millimeters, and we see the focus breathing problem is still there. You see it zooms in and out, definitely while you're focusing. It's not zooming, you're focusing, but the focus breathing looks like zooming. But there's no vignetting. At 76 millimeters, the vignetting is gone, and it's not as bad as, say, we go back to 38, and here with the focusing, the vignetting appears and hides a little bit during focusing. So that's about the video on a full frame. And now let's switch to the cropped sensor camera. And why we do that? Because it is actually very tempting to use such a small, light and very cheap lens on a small and cheap cropped sensor cameras. But usually full frame lenses, especially the cheapest ones, the old ones, the cheap ones, perform much worse on a cropped sensor even than on a full frame. So bad old lenses can be at least alright on a full frame. But for cropped sensor, they may present some problem. And now let's see, this is my SL2, which is also could be called 200D, and I put this lens on here, right, and we'll do just the same. Well, first the angle of view is going to be definitely different, and you'll see it in the pictures that I'll show you. And well, let's get to the 2-second timer. That's with the open wide aperture, 38 millimeters on a crop 1.6 crop sensor camera, and f9 as well. So it's totally different angle of view, but the picture quality might be much worse than it was in a full frame, but we'll see it in a second. And now let's get to the video. Let's do the same. Let's use the filter, and this camera already has the dual pixel autofocus, so the autofocusing works here, and we see. Now let's start the video. Well, here's the video started, and you see it's autofocusing, it works, and the vignetting is gone because of the crop factor. The vignetting is actually gone at 38 millimeters because the picture is actually like already zoomed in due to the crop factor of the camera. And now we can zoom into 76 millimeters. And you see no vignetting, of course, with the crop sensor camera, but you see the picture quality, if it's good enough. Yeah. Well, the lens works, and for full HD video, well, of course, it's not such a problem. The only problem is that the aperture actually jumps. You see it flickers a little bit because it's the old aperture mechanism, and you see it flickers as you zoom in because the value of the aperture actually changes from 4.5 to 5.6, and so you see this flickering during zooming. Oh, something's passing by, making this ugly noise. Well, basically, let's see what that was. That was this small device that was making that noise. So you see the actual video from SL2 here at 76 millimeters, and now back to 38. So much tighter angle of view. Let's stop the video. Much tighter. Let's close the window. Much tighter angle of view. Oh, the exposure, it's right. Much tighter angle of view in a crop sensor camera, and I don't think it's going to be a really good quality. And considering this, I would not recommend this lens for crop sensor cameras at all. You know, this good old 18 to 55 kit lens is going to be way better, especially that I have the latest version here, which doesn't have this weird zoom mechanism. This is normal, collapsed at wide angle and extended at telephoto. It's way sharper, it has image stabilizer. They are quite similar in size and weight, well, in size mostly, but in weight the old lens is even lighter. This is a little bit heavier, but this is way better. Don't even consider this 38 to 76 for crop sensor camera. And for full frame, it might be just all right. And the last thing to say before we go out and shoot outside and take some pictures and see if we can actually get something decent out of the dirt cheap 30-year-old but fully automatic, you know, electronic lens. And that's, I wanted to say a few words about the lens hood. Well, the official lens hood for this lens is ET-54, but I heard that EW-54 could also fit. So I could find and purchase these Chinese spin-off EW-54, but it doesn't fit. Well, it fits by the size, so the size is okay, it must fit, and the shape of the hood looks like it's proper shape for this type of lens, but the bayonet is different. So the bayonet here has like 3 points of attachment, and this only has 2, so it doesn't work. So you definitely need ET-54 lens hood for this lens, and I haven't found it, and I have no idea where I can find it. But anyway, that's it for the apartment shootings. Now let's go outside, and I'll tell you all the technical specifications of this lens, and we'll take some like live street photos. So here I am out in the street in this nice bright shiny spring weather. It's not that hot, but the weather is really sweet. So now let's talk what this lens presents by itself, like physically, and let's talk the build quality. And it's actually, well, here it is on my 5D Mark III on my neck with my strap. And it's actually, as you see, it's really small for a full frame lens and a zoom lens. I believe this is the smallest zoom lens that I've ever seen in my life, and I don't think there are any other full frame zoom lenses of such size and weight. And it's as I've told you previously, this is of the size of crop sensor kit lens like 1855, so you'll never meet such a small full-frame zoom lens. And about the weight, it's only 155 grams. You'll definitely never meet such a light zoom lens on a full frame, but it is also lighter than most prime lenses, and it's lighter than even the crop sensor lenses. And the only type of lenses that I know that are lighter than this one are actually pancake lenses. like Canon has, and I own them. The 24 2.8 pancake lens for crop sensor cameras, and its analog in full frame world, it's 40 2.8. They are about 125 grams. You can't go lower than that. And this one is 155, the smallest and the lightest lens for full frame. Now let's talk a little bit about its build quality. Well, it is like really cheap. It's not that it's particularly bad or badly made, but it's really cheap. It's cheap construction, it's simple construction. It is very simple and cheap materials, and it's felt in your hands, but it works. It absolutely works, and it's normal, it's all right. It's a branded Canon lenses, native lens, and I really respect native lenses, because some third parties, I had this experience in my life, some third parties just stop working after some time. Their apertures break, their autofocusing motors break, their zoom mechanisms break, but Canon lenses just work. If you do not bump them into something, you do not hit them, you do not stick them into your backpack and throw a lot of things on top of it so it brings a lot of pressure. If you don't do that, if you are careful with your equipment, and it's gonna be all right, and it's just gonna work for decades. Like this lens, it's almost 30 years old, and it works perfectly fine. So yeah, it's cheaply built, it has a plastic bayonet, and it's I would say it's very tender, so you better be very careful with it, but it simply works. So the build quality is not bad, it is cheap, it is simple, but it's perfectly fine. Now let's talk about the lens's basic characteristics, and the first that you see encrypted on the lens here, the numbers, the figures here, are of course the focal length, and it's from 38 to 76, and that sounds weird, and the weirdest that I've ever met. Like, really, what's wrong with you? 38, why 38? Why not 35, not 40? Well, I don't know. And 76, well, where's the focus? Freaking doesn't see my face in my sunglasses. Now, well, why 76, not 75, not 85, the classic focal lengths that we see in other lenses? And of course, Canon had old native lenses like 35 to 70 or 28 to 90 or something like that. These look like even numbers, but this 38, 76, why that? It's so weird, so strange, absurd. But actually there's a logic between these, at least these two figures, because 76 is just twice the zoom, well, like 38 multiplied by 2 is 76, so it's exactly twice the zoom range. From wide angle you can twice zoom twice, so that's logical. But why 38? It's a reasonably wide angle. Well, it's again losing my face. It's a reasonably wide angle, but it's on the verge between the wide and normal focal length is considered to be the diagonal of the full frame image sensor, which in case of full frame sensor is 36 by 24 millimeters, and the diagonal is 43. So the 43 millimeters of focal length would be a standard like normal field of view, which actually presents what we see with our own eyes. Well, it's just like it's considered to be, like, you know, it's just people are accustomed to that. And so 43, so actually the above mentioned pancake 40 millimeters 2.8 is actually closer to normal focal distance, and 50 is a little bit away from that, and 38 again, it's away from that, from 43, so it's wider than normal. And in my opinion, 35 is actually where you start to see the real wide angle. Well, of course, the wider 28, 24 is definitely wide angle. You see it, it differs from what you see with your own eyes. It creates different wide angle perspective, but 35 is where it actually starts, in my opinion. And 38 is just a little bit tighter than that. And on the other hand, like 76, and say from maybe 75 or 80, 85, you really start to see the telephoto perspective. So it's again not so natural for our own eyes. And so what we see, actually 38 and 76, it's right between these two. So maybe it's the best zoom range for a normal perspective, because 38 is not as wide that you see the objects distorting in your picture, and 76 is not zoom enough to see that much of compression that you know, confuses your vision. It's just messes up with your own natural eyes. So in my opinion, that was made, I don't know why. It's still very weird range, because 38 is not as wide if you want wide angle, and 76 is not so telephoto, but at least it's twice the zoom range, and it's really gets into this range of normal focal lengths. So any picture, you know, if you take a picture at any focal length with this lens, it's gonna really give you quite a natural perspective. And you know, I think that's the core idea of this zoom range. And talking about the zoom range, we should of course talk about the zoom mechanism itself. And it's weird and it's bad, and I really hate these types of zooming mechanisms. And what do I mean? Look at this. It actually extends when you zoom, but it as well extends when you zoom out. You see, so the front element of the lens actually extends to the both sides. That sucks, because if you want to, you know, bring your lens in the camera back to your backpack, you actually need to put it somewhere about 60 millimeters for it actually to collapse back. You see, that's a freaking mechanism. I really hate it. So you better not leave your lens at wide angle or at telephoto. You better leave it somewhere in between, not to bump it into something and not to damage this mechanism that sticks out of the lens. So some of other, well, luckily not many of the lenses have such a weird and cheap mechanism, but some of the crop sensor kit lenses, the old ones, had this, and they actually got rid of it with the latest version of crop sensor kit lens, which I showed you earlier. But this is a really freaking weird mechanism. I hate it, but it actually has some advantage as well. But about that I'll tell you later, when I'll tell you about all the advantages of this lens. Now let's talk about the aperture. And the aperture here is very dark, very dull, and really very boring. It comes from 4.5 at wide angle and darkens to 5.6 when zoomed in. And what does it mean? Well, actually, in such a bright, sunny weather, it's all right. You'll have enough shutter speed, enough light to get shorter shutter speeds and lower ISOs. Well, enough light is all right. Light is everything in photography. So in such conditions, in bright conditions with a flash, maybe with a good lighting, it's gonna be all right. But you'll have hard times in poor light conditions, or indoors or in the night or something like that, because you're gonna be either having shaky footage due to longer shutter speed, or you'll have noisier pictures because of the higher ISO that you are forced to use with that. So in general terms, the aperture is dark and boring, but of course it is usable. And as you see in the examples in this video, you can still have somewhat autofocus of backgrounds on a full frame sensor with this lens. So in basic terms, this lens is fine for street photography in bright light, for flash photography even indoors when you have enough light, and something like that. Maybe for architecture, if focal lengths fit you. So when you can allow yourself, and when you're shooting on a tripod, so when you can allow yourself a long shutter speed, because this lens doesn't let in a lot of light. But for portraits, for sports, for fast moving objects, it's definitely a bad choice. So just beware of that. But if you want some artistic shots with a lot of out of focus areas behind or in front of your subject, this is definitely not an artistic lens. You better look somewhere else. Now, the next important characteristic of the lens is its minimum focusing distance. So how close you can shoot to your subject and get some kind of macro. Well, in case of this lens, just forget about it. The minimum focusing distance is 58 centimeters. That's ugly, because even classical 24-105 or maybe 51.8 old versions, they had 45 centimeters, and this has 58. So that's weird. And since we're comparing to the crop sensor kit lenses 18-55, it has 25 centimeters, more than twice closer than this one. So just forget about any type of macro with this lens. But Still, if you want to get the most out of focusing backgrounds, you better zoom in to 76 millimeters and get to 58 centimeters to your subject. There's a little girl passing by. So forget about real macro on this lens. The minimum focusing distance is really, really long and uninteresting. Now this lens officially has 5 aperture blades or 5 diaphragm, iris diaphragm blades, talking scientifically, which theoretically means that when the aperture is stopped down, the bokeh balls or the bokeh shape in the autofocus area must have some weird nut shape. But if it is so or not, I'm showing you on the screen, just making these test pictures, because it also depends on how rounded actually these aperture blades are. There can be few of them, but if their shape is rounded, they can still give round bokeh balls. But if they are rough, if they are like straight or plain, well, of course, you're going to be receiving these weird bokeh balls nut shape. Now let's talk about autofocus in this lens. And despite this be one of the cheapest lenses in the world altogether, I believe the cheaper ones are maybe the ones with the manual focus. So this really has autofocus, and since this is a Canon native lens, the autofocus is really decent. It is not USM, it is not STM, and it's not even AFD, the first and oldest autofocusing motor. This looks like a very simple micro motor, but it is much better than the older ones in, say, the same cropped sensor kit lenses. And let me show how it works. So you see, it is decently fast, and I would say that it's actually quite accurate. So autofocus, it works perfectly fine. This is a really decent autofocus. It just works. It's not the fastest, so you'll find hard times tracking the subjects. Yes, it is not the fastest, but it simply works. For street photography, for anything else, it's just fine. But there is a problem with that. And it's both about the manual focus and the autofocus. It is that the front element actually rotates and extends. While you are focusing, you see, it rotates and it extends. And what does that mean? Well, first, you should never bump into this element, because you can simply break or damage it. And second, since it is rotating, you'll have hard times using gradient filters or circular polarizing filters. So when you need a certain angle to the horizon and when you are refocusing, you're going to mess it. You're going to spoil the setting of your circular polarizer or gradient or whatever filter you use. So it's going to spoil it because the front element actually rotates. And about the manual focusing, just switch it with the single button on the lens. And you need to rotate this same front element, you see? There's no separate ring for focusing, but you just rotate this front element, and of course it extends and rotates. So, and the focus throw is very little, so it's not comfortable to use manual focusing. Better use autofocus because it works just fine, but it extends and rotates. Just beware of that. Well, by this moment I'm really tired of walking around the town and talking about this lens, so let's go find a nice coffee shop and probably finish our review there. That's nice. So I dropped into my friend's coffee shop to finish up this review, and luckily there is a place for that. And there's actually not much to talk about this lens any longer, except for its weather sealing. Well, it actually has none. So you better not try it out in dusty environment or in moisture. But at the same time, Canon lenses are actually really reliable, and I don't think they're afraid of temperature. I think they're gonna be working fine in heat or frost. But you better not try them out in sandstorms or deluges or something like that. So this is the cheapest lens in the world. It's not weather sealed. Just be careful with it. But now, what's left to talk about it is actually it's about its advantages, and it really has 3 of them, despite being the cheapest and simplest in the world. And the first is obviously its price, size, and weight. It's the lightest, cheapest, and the smallest zoom lens for full-frame cameras. So it's obvious advantage. And if you need a simple lens just to carry it with you, maybe alongside with some nice fast prime lenses, that's the best choice. And just don't require a lot from this. This is a cheap, simple lens that just gets the work done. But the little bit hidden advantages here is actually its zoom ring. And I've told you that it's weird, it extends while zooming in and zooming out, and that sucks. But the zoom itself is really, really smooth. Yes, it is. I actually wish some of my other lenses have such smooth zoom like this. It's really smooth, and I'm showing you here in these examples that you can really, really smoothly zoom in and out, which is like very great for, let me refocus, this is really great for video work. It doesn't make any difference for photo work, but for videos, this is just fantastic. This is really, really smooth. So it's just twice the range, twice the zoom range, but the zoom itself is really smooth. It's fantastically smooth. So here's on a tripod. Let's see how smooth the zoom mechanism can be. That's twice the zoom, from 38 to 76 millimeters, and zooming out. This is really, really smooth from a tripod. That's absolutely perfect, no problem. Faster, slower, however you want. You see, you can get even slow, smooth zoom. So it's really, really good on this lens. But there's one more trick. If I switch the electronic stabilization on my 6D Mark II, now it's turned on and it's robbed me of 10% of the frame, just 10%. But for that, I can actually have it handheld, and it's going to be stabilized, and I can still zoom in quite smoothly. You see, that's a handheld zoom with the electronic stabilization, and that's really, really smooth. You see the exposure flickering, but that's because of the old aperture mechanism in this old lens. But the zoom itself is really, really smooth. And of course, if you have a camera with IBIS, with in-body image stabilizer, I seriously doubt that you'll buy this cheap lens for your expensive body with the image stabilization. But anyway, if you have IBIS, you'll of course have the real focal length without losing 10% on electronic stabilization. You'll have the sensor stabilizer and still the very smooth zoom. And by the way, this was the zoom without electronic stabilization, handheld. And the other advantage concerns the autofocus. It's really quiet. Yes, it is micromotor, but for micromotor, it is really, really quiet. And let me try and bring this lens right to the microphone here, you see? Right to the microphone. And just autofocus. You see? You hear a little whooshing sound while it focuses, but it's really, really quiet, and it's right in front of the microphone. Let me just make it a little bit away from the microphone. And you see I'm refocusing, and I believe you don't hear it. While some of the other micromotors just, buzz like hell. This is really, really quiet autofocusing motor, and of course it's again very, very useful for video work. You might even be able to use it with the on top of the camera shotgun mics. Well, I'll show you the example here. Well, here we are with this lens at 38 millimeters, the widest angle it has, and the 6D Mark II with its perfect dual pixel autofocus. And we'll just see how it tracks my face. Well, just a couple of disclaimers. I'm using the shutter speed of 1000 here, which is obviously not proper for a video of 25 frames per second. But, well, you wouldn't see the difference with the talking head like this. But if I move my hands, you see there's no motion blur because the shutter speed is very fast. And why did I do that? I just did that because the front element is such a vulnerable, in my opinion. It is small, and it is plastic, and it extends and rotates. So if I put my professional grade heavy metallic filter, ND filter system, I'm really afraid that it's going to damage or break it. And especially that this has 52 millimeters diameter of filter thread. My filter system is 82, so I'll have to use a lot of stepping rings, so it's going to be really heavy setup. So just using it wide open at f4.5 with the 1000th of a second shutter speed. So now let me walk away from the camera and towards to it and see how focusing actually works. And it's refocusing. I'm using just the central area here because it can be hard to track the face in my sunglasses, and it's really sunny, bright, shiny day, so I wouldn't take them off. But as you see, I believe it just tracks me perfectly as I'm coming in and going out. So this is at 38 millimeters. I don't think there's any problem with focusing. So now let's zoom in to 76 millimeters and go a little bit further. And again, I think it just tracks me just fine. So here I see there is my head moving towards and away, just like the Hobbit's tail, there and back again. So you see, the autofocus in video mode works just perfectly. It just works. No problems with focusing, either in photo or on video. And now I'm going to test the sound of this motor with this little shotgun mic. It's not intended for long distances, so it's more like for wide angle. You'd hardly shoot this lens at a straight arm at 38 millimeters. It's a little bit too much, but we're going just to see if the focusing is how silent the focusing is, how quiet it is with the on-camera shotgun mic. So here we are with the shotgun mic. I believe it's gonna pick up a lot of environmental noise. It's okay, and I'm about a straight arm from the lens, so it picks up some of my voice, but if I go further away, I think it's gonna be more noisy, and it's not intended for that. But I'm just gonna walk there and back again like a hobbit, and we'll just listen to the autofocusing motor. If the shotgun mic is gonna pick up the sound, the rattling of the motor. Let me shut up and listen to the motor. So that was at 38 millimeters, now zooming to 76. So you be the judge if this is loud enough for a, for a shotgun mic or not, but of course with the wireless system it's gonna work just fine. And with the shotgun mic, you decide for yourself. But all in all, this is really smooth zoom and really quiet autofocus, which is surprisingly quiet for very cheap lens with a micro motor. So these are all the advantages, I believe. It's cheap, small, light, quiet, and smooth. What else do you want from the cheapest lens in the world? So that's about it. My name is Paul Kretz, and if you haven't already, just subscribe to this channel, press like, and leave a comment below if you ever tried this lens, or maybe even weirder lens, or what other lenses you consider really weird. Just put them down in the comment section below, and I believe I'll see you in the next videos. Or maybe not. It's up to you.